There is a paradox in modern life. The more freedom we have, the more directionless we become. We wake up each morning with thousands of options, yet find ourselves drawn into trivialities, social media, meaningless conversations, things that are urgent but not important. And then the day ends with a vague sense that we've lost something, not time, but ourselves. You think you need motivation to change? Wrong. What you truly need is a set of laws, a personal system that keeps you grounded amidst the chaos, a mental structure that helps you stay aligned when everything around you begins to shake. This is exactly what the Stoic philosophers understood thousands of years ago. They didn't wait for inspiration, they acted based on principles. The 12 Stoic rules in this video aren't life hacks. They are a foundation upon which you rebuild yourself, day by day, action by action, decision by decision, no matter how small. If you're ready, begin now, this very moment. 1. Discipline is the highest form of self-respect. There's something we rarely acknowledge. The way we treat ourselves when no one is watching is the truest measure of self-respect. When you set your alarm for 6 a.m., but hit snooze for the third time, no one calls you out. When you promise yourself to read 10 pages each night, but end up scrolling online until late, no one judges you. But that silence is a mirror. It reflects what you truly believe about yourself. Not through words, but through action, not when there's an audience, but when you are alone. Discipline is not punishment. It doesn't come from self-hatred or a desire to suffer. On the contrary, it is a conscious choice to live in alignment with your values. When you pause before eating junk food, when you go work out even though it's raining or your mood is off, that's not missing out on life, as people often say. That is you telling yourself, I deserve a healthy body, a clear mind, and a focused future. And in that quiet restraint, self-respect becomes unmistakable, wordless yet evident. The truth is, most of the time we betray ourselves not through major failures, but through small permissions. Just this once. I'm too tired. Tomorrow will be different. But every time we choose comfort over what's right, we reinforce a quiet message to ourselves. I'm not worth the effort. And when that message repeats often enough, it doesn't just wear us down, it erodes our belief in our own capability. True discipline is a form of love, not soft, indulgent love, but mature, steady love. The kind that says no when needed and keeps promises even in silence. When you start honoring your word to yourself, not because you fear judgment, but because you believe you're worth the consistency, that is when you begin to walk the first steps toward real freedom. Because no one can respect you if you don't show it first. And discipline is how you show it, not in speech, but in action. 2. It must align with your nature. Discipline shouldn't be armor you wear from the outside. It must become a second skin, fitting, flexible, and woven into the way you live. Many people fail at discipline not because they're weak, but because they're living by someone else's rhythm. They read that successful people wake at 5 a.m., run, meditate, and do deep work in silence. So they force themselves into that mold, only to feel pressure, frustration, and guilt days later. Not because they lack willpower, but because they've betrayed their own biology and psychology. Real discipline doesn't come from following a fixed formula. It comes from self-understanding. Some people thrive early in the morning when their minds are fresh. Others come alive at night when the world is quiet and their creativity ignites. Some need silence to focus. Others need background music, keystrokes, or movement to stay in flow. So discipline isn't doing what they do. Discipline is I know how I work, and I intentionally structure my life around that. Stoic philosophy never advocated for us to become carbon copies of one another. Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus didn't live the same way. One was an emperor, the other a slave. Yet both lived by an inner code, a law they set for themselves, rooted in their nature and circumstances. That's the key. You can't force yourself into someone else's discipline and expect sustainability. Instead, discipline must be designed to act as scaffolding, not a cage. You don't have to love waking up early, but you need a clear morning. You don't have to work 8 hours straight, but you must know your peak hours and use them. You don't need to journal nightly if it keeps you awake, but you might write a few lines each morning to ground your thoughts. When you stop chasing trends and start listening to yourself, you'll realize discipline isn't confinement, it's liberation, because it allows you to live authentically while still moving forward. So ask yourself, what kind of discipline truly strengthens me? And am I trying to be disciplined or just trying to be like someone else? The answers will bring you back to yourself, where maturity begins, not through force, but through honesty. 3. Without order, the mind unravels. Your mind doesn't collapse overnight. It unravels little by little, through unanswered messages, aimless mornings, and delayed tasks with no clear reason. One day you realize you're busy yet adrift, exhausted yet unsure why, sluggish in a life of your own making, not because you lack ability, but because you've let life drift without structure, without order. And when there's no order, the mind begins to spiral, quietly, steadily, and ruthlessly. The Stoics understood this deeply. They didn't demand total control, but they knew that without limits, without guiding principles, we are easily swept away by the trivial, the shallow distractions, the seemingly harmless details that quietly breed inner chaos. Order, in this sense, doesn't mean a rigid schedule. It means establishing anchors in your day, meaningful moments where you pause and remind yourself what truly matters. A morning that begins with a few minutes of stillness, a simple and clear to-do list, a firm limit on time spent online. These are small actions, yet they give your mind room to breathe, to focus, to reflect. On the other hand, when you let everything unfold at random, your mind enters a reactive state. You react to messages, urgent emails, distressing headlines, other people's chaos. Gradually, you lose your sense of control, not because you're weak, but because you haven't built a strong enough inner architecture to resist the noise. Order doesn't kill creativity, as many wrongly believe. It's the foundation that allows creativity to grow with direction. Without structure, inspiration dissolves into confusion. Without boundaries, effort turns into burnout. That's why creating order is an act of kindness, not to control every moment, but to protect what matters most from being devoured by the rush of the world. Ask yourself, what in my life is creating noise that I've come to accept? Maybe it's a cluttered desk, an aimless routine, or empty conversations that drag on. Start clearing them out, one by one, not to reach perfection, but to regain clarity. Because in a world that constantly demands reaction, the one who creates order is the one who remains sovereign over themselves. 4. Success can make you weak. People often think failure is what throws us off course, but the truth is the opposite. Success is the sweetest trap. When you're striving to rise, you stay alert, disciplined, unwilling to slack off. But once you've hit a milestone or achieved a certain outcome, the mind starts to whisper, "You've earned a break. You deserve to ease up." And that's when discipline starts to crack. Not through big mistakes, but through quiet indulgences. Just for today. One day off won't hurt. You don't notice it at first, but bit by bit, sharpness, focus, and hunger are worn down by fleeting satisfaction. The Stoics understood that success is not the destination, it's just a stop on the path of self-mastery. Marcus Aurelius, though the most powerful emperor of his time, reminded himself each night to uphold virtue, to stay humble, to keep living rightly. He knew power could blind, and victory could soften. Not physically, but in the form of complacency, self-satisfaction, the gradual lowering of one's inner standards. Weakness after success rarely announces itself. It slips in quietly. In the mornings you sleep a little later. The skipped workouts, the abandoned journaling, the postponed challenges. You tell yourself you've done enough, but in truth, the habits that once built your best self are falling away, one by one. And when those habits vanish, you're no longer standing on solid ground, but on past achievements, things that can no longer move you forward. Training after success requires a different fuel. It's no longer about proving something, it's about loyalty to the path you chose. You don't continue because you fear failure, but because you won't betray the disciplined self that brought you this far. You keep going not for a new outcome, but because endurance has become part of your identity. So if you're in a good season, don't loosen your grip. Ask yourself, am I still living as the person who got me here? If the answer is no, remember, what built you was discipline, and only discipline will keep you here. Success is not a reason to stop. It is a reminder that you've come far, and now it's time to go farther. 5. Don't wait for motivation to act. One of the most dangerous illusions we believe is that inspiration must come before action. We wait until we feel ready, until the mood improves, the energy returns, or someone pushes us from the outside. But the truth is, if you wait for inspiration to act, you'll spend most of your life waiting. Because inspiration is unpredictable, it rises and falls like the tide. And if you place your power in it, you've handed your life over to something entirely unstable. Stoic discipline teaches the opposite. Action comes first, emotions follow. They understood that the mind often resists starting, but once motion begins, focus and motivation gather with each small move. The first rep in the gym is the hardest. The first sentence on the page weighs the most. The first step out of bed has the strongest resistance. But once you begin, your body and mind align with the momentum of action. You don't need to feel like doing it to do it. You just need to start. When you don't want to study, open the book and read one paragraph. When you don't want to exercise, change clothes and walk for 5 minutes. When you feel drained and paralyzed, choose one small task and complete it. The point is not how much you do, but that you stay in charge, that you remain the actor, not the victim of mood. Inspiration comes from keeping your word to yourself, from acting even when no one is cheering. And that is where inner strength is born, a power not dependent on circumstances. Disciplined people aren't always burning with passion. They've simply learned not to wait for the flame to start moving. They make fire with every step they take. So if you're putting off something important because you're not ready, stop and ask, if I don't do this today, how will tomorrow be any different? If the answer is not much, then do it now, because the quiet, non-urgent things are often what shape your life most profoundly. Act even without motivation, because it's the only way to truly reclaim your power. 6. Live by conscious choice. There's a quiet truth many avoid. Most of us aren't really living, we're just reacting. reacting to phone notifications, to schedules imposed by others, to expectations we never truly chose. We call it routine, but in reality, it's reflex born of inattention. We eat because we're bored, scroll because we feel empty, procrastinate because we fear failure. And so the days repeat without us ever understanding why change feels impossible. Stoic philosophy never promoted a passive life. They rejected being led by instinct or mindless habit. They emphasized that to truly govern your life, you must start by governing your choices. Every small choice, even in moments that seem insignificant. That means pausing before every automatic action and asking, am I doing this because I've truly chosen it, or because it's just what I always do? Do you reach for your phone each morning before you even know what you want from the day? Do you say yes to invitations just to avoid disappointing others, even when your heart says no? Are you chasing a goal someone once said you should pursue, without ever asking if it fits who you really are? If the answer is yes, you're not alone, but you also don't have to stay there. Living by conscious choice doesn't mean controlling everything. It simply means pausing to listen within, to ask, does this align with the values I want to live by? Does it bring me closer to who I'm trying to become? When you start practicing this, every behavior shifts, from reaction to intention, from impulse to wisdom. And this is the true foundation of discipline. Because discipline is not about forcing yourself to do hard things. It's about knowing what is truly worth doing and then acting on it. Not because of fleeting emotion or stale habits, but because it's aligned with your higher purpose. When you live with conscious choice, life no longer drags you, you shape it. And in that shaping, even the smallest act becomes powerful, because it is chosen, not blindly repeated. 7. Who are you when no one's watching? There's a simple yet profound question you should ask yourself often. Who am I when no one is watching? When there are no stage lights, no scores to be given, no applause or reminders from loved ones, how do you act? That is your truest self. Not the version edited for the moment, but the core that quietly shapes your destiny. In this age, we live far too much under the gaze of others. Social media makes every action shareable, every achievement displayable. But the truth is, what builds real, lasting value in a person happens in the dark, where you're alone with small choices no one will ever see. Do you turn off your phone or scroll for another 30 minutes? Do you sit down to work on time or postpone yet another morning? Do you do the hard thing when no one's watching or wait until someone's around to keep you accountable? These quiet choices define you, little by little. Those who pursue true discipline need no pushing, no rewards. They understand that the real reward is the ability to trust themselves. When you consistently keep your word, even in small things like waking early, exercising, finishing tasks on time, you build a priceless internal trust. I'm someone I can rely on, even when no one sees. And once that trust is formed, you move through life with a quiet, grounded confidence. You don't need to shout that you're disciplined. You just live that way. Marcus Aurelius was an emperor, yet he journaled every night, not for others to read, but to stay aligned. He knew that power blinds easily, and only silent discipline could preserve virtue when no one's watching. That's why Stoic philosophers always focused on inner strength, not outward image. If you want to change your life, don't begin by proving something to the world. Begin by asking yourself each day, do I keep my word when no one's watching? And if the answer is no, don't judge. Don't make grand promises. Just begin with one small act, Do what you said you'd do, even if no one knows, and repeat that daily. Because it is in those silent moments that you shape who you will become, not by light, but by shadow. Not through applause, but through quiet resolve. 8. Learn to control the dopamine urge. You're not lazy. You're not born undisciplined. What you're struggling with isn't weak willpower. It's a brain trained to crave cheap rewards. In an age where a single swipe delivers endless entertainment, a tap allows you to shop, chat, or escape discomfort, we're drowning in a flood of dopamine, waves of short-term pleasure that strike so often they erode the mind's natural self-control. Dopamine itself isn't the enemy. It's a neurotransmitter that helps us learn, remember, and stay motivated. The problem lies in how we consume it. When dopamine comes too quickly, too easily, from things that require no effort, like short videos, fast food, constant notifications, our brains slowly lose the ability to find joy in things that truly matter, things that require time, effort, and commitment. That's why reading starts to feel boring, working out feels exhausting, and deep work becomes punishment. The Stoics, though they lived in a world without phones or social media, understood this instinctively. They chose simplicity, restrained consumption, and trained their minds to find meaning in moderation. For them, controlling desire wasn't about rejecting life's pleasures. It was about protecting awareness and preserving freedom. A person who can't resist small pleasures will struggle to stand firm against greater temptations. Retraining your dopamine system doesn't mean rejecting all comfort. It just means knowing what you're really seeking. Are you chasing instant gratification or deeper fulfillment? Instead of checking your phone every 5 minutes, practice delay. Keep it away from your workspace. Create dopamine-free zones, maybe 30 minutes tech-free each morning or one social media-free evening a week. Let your brain remember what it feels like when silence isn't emptiness, but liberation. As you step away from fast stimulation, you'll rediscover something surprising. The things that once bored you, silent walks, focused work, finishing a book, become satisfying again. Because sustainable dopamine doesn't come from consumption, it comes from effort, and discipline no longer feels like a burden. It becomes natural. You don't need to cut out every joy, but you must take control over how you seek it. When you master your dopamine urges, you reclaim direction over your mind. And with a stable mind, your life will no longer be driven by unconscious scrolling, but by conscious decisions. 9. Structure is an act of kindness to yourself. When people hear discipline or schedule, they often imagine rigidity, cold routines, and a life drained of freedom. They fear that too many rules will rob life of spontaneity and joy. But the truth is the opposite. In a world flooded with distractions, randomness, and demands on your attention, structure is the kindest act you can offer yourself. It isn't a chain. It's a fence that protects you from being pulled apart and burned out by chaos. Structure is how you say to yourself, I matter. My time and energy are worth protecting. Without a clear plan, you live reactively, doing whatever appears first, not what matters most. You start your morning by checking your phone, fall into messages and social feeds, and by the time you look up, half the day is gone, and nothing meaningful is done. Not because you did nothing, but because you didn't do what needed to be done. Not because you're incapable, but because you lacked a strong enough framework to stay grounded. By contrast, even a simple, intentional schedule helps you know when to work and when to rest. It doesn't make life rigid. It brings ease because you no longer waste mental energy deciding every little thing. You don't need to ask where to start, because you've already chosen. It conserves mental bandwidth and eases invisible stress. The Stoics didn't live in disorder. They chose simplicity, regularity, and small, unwavering principles. To them, structure was the foundation for mental peace. Without it, we chase fleeting emotions and delay what matters most just because we don't feel ready. But with structure, readiness doesn't matter. You simply step into the frame and begin. If you feel overwhelmed, it's not because you have too much to do, it's because everything's happening without order. Try assigning one fixed hour a day to focus on a single task. You don't need to plan the whole year. Just start small. Write for 10 minutes each morning. Avoid your phone until 9 a.m. Dedicate 1 hour of uninterrupted work at the start of the day. Each of these frames is a quiet declaration. I will not let life run me. And as you repeat this, you'll find a real peace, not from controlling everything, but from knowing where you're headed. That's freedom born from structure. A quiet, deep, and lasting kind of freedom that no burst of inspiration can ever replace. 10. Act like the person you want to become. Your habits aren't just repeated actions. They are quiet votes you cast every day for the identity you're building. Every time you keep a promise, you affirm to yourself, I'm someone who can be trusted. Every time you complete a task without being told, you declare, I am disciplined. And the opposite is also true. Every time you procrastinate, give in, or settle for ease, you send another message that you're not yet ready to become your best self. Change doesn't begin with emotion, it begins with action. If you wait until you feel strong to act strong, you'll wait a long time. Emotions come after. Action is the catalyst. It's the silent fuse for inner transformation. Successful people don't wait to feel confident before they begin. They act as if they already are, and over time, their feelings catch up to their behavior. Stoic philosophy doesn't teach you to dream. It teaches you to practice. And practice begins by living each day as if you were already the person you want to be. If you want to be calmer, act calm during your next conflict. If you want to be diligent, start tomorrow by working as though you've never missed a goal. That's not pretending, it's training. Because the brain doesn't distinguish between I'm practicing and I am. It only records what you repeat, and what you repeat becomes who you are. You don't need to be perfect today. You just need to choose one behavior, one decision, one reaction, and ask, what would the person I want to be do in this moment? Then do that. Even if it's hard, even if it feels unnatural, even if no one is watching, that single act is the first brick in the foundation of your new self. You don't need a dramatic transformation. You just need to stack small, deliberate actions until one day they become instinct. Marcus Aurelius didn't journal to celebrate success. He wrote to reflect, to measure how closely he lived to his moral ideals. And that's a reminder. You don't need to wait for the right time. That time is now, when you act, not from emotion, but from the identity you want to embody. That is discipline at its highest level, not living from who you've been, but from who you aim to become. Repeat that long enough, and you won't be pretending anymore. You'll truly become that person. 11. Every minute is a brick in the life you're building. You have 1,240 minutes each day, no more, no less. And whether you realize it or not, you're using each of them to build something. A habit, a self-image, a version of who you are, or inertia, confusion, and regret. Every action, no matter how small, is a brick. The question isn't how many bricks you have, but what you're building with them. People tend to celebrate big actions, finishing a book, completing a project, losing 10 pounds, earning a certificate. But none of those come from random bursts of inspiration. They come from thousands of unnoticed minutes. The mornings you wrote 10 lines instead of sleeping in. The afternoons you looked away from your phone to focus. The moments you chose the harder path even when no one was watching. That's how you build something lasting, not through rare highs, but through small, deliberate units of time laid down one after another. The Stoics understood this early on. Seneca once said, "It's not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it." And that waste doesn't happen loudly. It happens when you open your phone for 5 minutes and lose 30. When you say tomorrow to something important, 5 days in a row. When you let unstructured hours drift into haze instead of anchoring them in clarity and action. And then, like many, you look back at a week, a month, a year, and wonder why you haven't made progress. No brick is too small to matter. A punctual call, a healthy meal, a 15-minute reading session, these are the structural pieces of the life you live. If you're not laying the bricks intentionally, don't be surprised if your inner house becomes cluttered, unbalanced, or crumbles from unconscious choices piled over time. Start treating time as building material. Each passing minute isn't dead space, it's potential. And no one but you decides what that potential becomes. You don't need to use every minute with extreme rigor, but you do need to stay conscious. Is this minute laying a brick for growth or for delay? Because the temple you'll live in, your life, isn't built in a single moment of brilliance, but in thousands of seemingly trivial, repeated, and unrecognized moments. And those are what make the real difference. 12. If you don't measure it, you're guessing. Many people say they want change, discipline, progress. But when asked, how much progress have you made? How long have you sustained it? Have you truly followed through on what you said? Silence often follows. Not because they didn't try, but because they didn't track. And when you don't measure, you don't know where you're going, whether you're advancing or falling back, holding steady or drifting. You're not growing, you're just busy. Discipline isn't just repeating action, it's having the courage to face results. You can work out daily, but without tracking your progress, you won't know what's working or what's wasted effort. You can study every night, but if you don't test your understanding, you're learning an illusion. Discipline isn't blind performance. It's a process that must be verifiable, even if only by you. The Stoics prized self-examination. Marcus Aurelius journaled nightly, not to recount achievements, but to ask, did I act rightly today? What did I fail to do well? What do I need to correct tomorrow? That is measurement. Not turning life into a spreadsheet, but holding an honest, steady mirror to yourself. You don't need complex tools to begin. A small notebook, a simple chart, even a daily question, what today brought me closer to the person I want to be, can change everything. Measuring isn't about pointing out your flaws, it's how you avoid repeating them. It keeps you from unconsciously starting over. It helps you see what's working, what's draining you, and what's simply distraction. If you feel like you're trying hard, but not changing much, it may not be a lack of effort, but a lack of light. You're walking in the dark without a lamp. Measuring is that light. It gives you feedback so you can make better choices. Whether it's tracking sleep, how often you finish tasks on time, or how frequently you do hard things instead of comfortable ones, all of it reflects your real behavior, not the image you hold of yourself. I used to think discipline was something harsh, rigid, meant only for those born strong or obsessed with achievement. But the longer I live, the more I realize Discipline isn't a burden. It's a gift. It doesn't strip away freedom. It creates it. The kind of freedom that doesn't come from doing whatever you want, but from knowing exactly what you should do and doing it with intention. Discipline is how I've learned to keep promises to myself, not to prove anything to others, but so I can hold my head high with myself. It's the foundation for confidence, for peace of mind, and the anchor that keeps me from drifting in a world full of distractions. Every time I live in line with the discipline I chose, I feel closer to the best version of myself. Not in one grand moment, but in small, daily actions. And that, to me, is worth more than any title or external recognition. If you found value in this message, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next videos. And remember, you don't have to wait until you feel ready to start living with discipline. You just have to begin, one step, one choice at a time, and that alone is enough to transform a life. See you in the next video.